I'm Amanda, 34, and my daughter Grace is 12. Last year at Thanksgiving, I never imagined that my sister, Stephanie, would humiliate my daughter in front of the whole family. It was a moment that changed everything. Grace ended up crying in a muddy puddle, and that's when everything turned upside down. If you've ever had to stand up to toxic family members, drop a comment and let me know where you're watching from. And don't forget to hit that subscribe button for more real stories like this one. Growing up, my family always had a clear favorite. My sister, Stephanie. She was the golden child, always thinner, prettier, and admired by everyone, including our parents. Me? I was the black sheep. My weight was always a topic at dinner with comments like, "Amanda, do you really need another roll?" from my mom while piling extra food on Stephanie's plate. By the time I was 10, I internalized that something was wrong with my body, and Stephanie made sure to capitalize on my insecurities. In middle school, she and her friends nicknamed me Piggy. I remember crying to my dad, but he just said, "Develop thicker skin." My mom? She suggested I try harder with my appearance, and neither of them ever told Stephanie to stop. High school wasn't any better. Stephanie was the homecoming queen, class president, and she graduated with honors. I, on the other hand, found solace in art and creative writing, but these were always dismissed as hobbies. At my graduation dinner, my parents spent more time discussing Stephanie's college scholarship than celebrating me. But then I met Michael during my sophomore year of college. He was different, quiet but confident. He saw me for who I truly was, not my weight or what I ate. On our third date, I hesitantly ordered a salad, and he told me, "Get whatever you actually want to eat. I asked you out because I like who you are, not because of what you eat." It felt like the first free breath I had ever taken. When Michael met my family, he witnessed the dynamic firsthand. Stephanie made a snide comment about how I had finally found someone willing to date the chubby sister. Michael, calm as ever, replied, "I found someone with a beautiful heart, which seems rare in this family." The silence that followed was deafening. But that was the moment I knew he was the one. So when Thanksgiving rolled around last year, I never imagined things would go so wrong. But when Grace ended up in that muddy puddle, everything changed. Stay tuned to hear how it all unfolded and how Michael turned our family upside down. Thanksgiving Day arrived, and I was already feeling the tension building up inside me. I wanted so badly for it to be different this time. Maybe, just maybe, my family would finally see Grace and Michael for who they really were. But deep down, I knew that was unlikely. We arrived at my parents' home just as the rain started to fall, and the familiar tightening in my chest began. Michael tried to lighten the mood, telling jokes to make Grace laugh, but the tension was still there. My mom greeted us at the door with her usual, overly careful compliments, her eyes flicking over Grace's figure in that way that always made me uncomfortable. Inside, the house smelled of roasted turkey and cinnamon, the exact same as it had every Thanksgiving of my childhood. The difference now was the weight of the years of being dismissed, ignored, and belittled. But today, I was determined to make it through. For Grace. As we made our way into the living room, I noticed Stephanie standing there, looking perfect as always. Her hair was styled flawlessly, and she wore a pristine cream cashmere sweater and tailored pants. Beside her was her husband, James, looking every bit the part of the successful investment banker. Meanwhile, Michael and I had already been relegated to the edges of the room as always. Stephanie wasted no time. She walked over, Air kissed me on the cheek and casually dismissed the homemade cranberry brie puffs I had spent hours preparing. "Oh, I can help Mom with whatever you brought for the appetizer table," she said, her tone dripping with condescension. I could feel the irritation bubbling up, but I held it in. Michael stepped in with a gentle but firm response. "Amanda's an excellent baker." The smile on Stephanie's face didn't reach her eyes, and I could feel her judgment hanging in the air. "Are you still doing that part-time graphic design work?" she asked, like she couldn't even be bothered to care. Before I could respond, her daughters, Emma and Lily, approached Grace, already casting their judgment. "Hi, Grace," Emma said, her voice oozing with a confidence Grace clearly didn't have. "Cute dress? Is it new?" Grace smiled shyly. "Yeah, Mom helped me pick it out." Lily chimed in with a comment that made Grace's smile falter. "It's very bold," she said, exchanging a glance with Emma. I could see Grace shrinking, the weight of their criticism already starting to affect her. "Why don't you show Grace the new game room downstairs?" James suggested, clearly oblivious to the tension. Grace followed them downstairs, trying to keep up, but I could see the change in her, the usual confidence starting to slip away. Stephanie had made it clear. Grace wasn't welcome in this world of perfection. The rest of the day passed with more subtle jabs, remarks about Grace's clothes, comments about why she wasn't involved in competitive sports like Emma and Lily. As I helped prepare the meal in the kitchen, my mother's passive-aggressive comments about my cooking method and Stephanie's praise of herself for brining the turkey overnight felt like knives in my back. I watched through the window as Grace tried to fit in with her cousins, who were changing the rules of the game whenever she got close to winning. My stomach turned. I wanted to step in, but I knew Michael had promised to run interference if things got too much. Dinner was the same. Stephanie's family positioned front and center, while Michael, Grace, and I were on the far side of the table. My parents didn't even try to hide the favoritism. Grace ate quietly, trying to avoid any more attention, but I could see her withdrawing further and further into herself. Then, as Grace reached for the basket of rolls, she accidentally knocked over Lily's water glass. The water spilled across the pristine tablecloth, and the room seemed to freeze. "Oh, Lily, is your dress wet?" Stephanie said sharply, already on her feet. Grace was beside herself with embarrassment. "I'm so sorry," she said, frantically trying to clean up the mess. But it was too late. Stephanie's sharp voice cut through the air. "You need to be more careful," she scolded. "These linens are antique." Michael, calm as ever, intervened. "It's just water, no harm done," he said, trying to defuse the situation. But Stephanie wasn't having it. "Well, not everyone knows how to handle delicate things like this," she said, glaring at Grace. At this point, I could feel my anger rising. Stephanie had crossed a line. My daughter wasn't her punching bag, but instead of saying anything, I held back, knowing any response would only make things worse for Grace. When dinner finally ended, my mother suggested we have dessert outside on the patio, despite the growing rain. Grace, clearly trying to avoid further criticism, followed her cousins out. I was about to check on her when I heard raised voices coming from the kitchen. I rushed to the doorway to find Stephanie confronting Grace, accusing her of shoving Emma. Grace denied it, but it didn't matter. The moment I stepped in, Stephanie made it clear. This wasn't just about the incident. It was about her twisted need to feel superior. The atmosphere had shifted completely. The tension was thick in the air, and I could feel my blood boiling as I looked at Stephanie, her smug expression mocking Grace's pain. But nothing could have prepared me for what happened next. I watched through the kitchen window as Grace stood with her cousins, trying her best to fit in, despite their subtle jabs and unspoken exclusion. Then I saw it, the moment that would change everything. Grace, in an effort to move past the tension, was pushed into a large, muddy puddle at the base of the patio steps. She screamed, her voice laced with shock and pain. My heart sank as I watched my daughter, her new burgundy dress ruined, her hair matted with dirty water. She was sobbing uncontrollably, and in that moment, I knew nothing would ever be the same. I rushed down the steps to Grace, my own legs shaking with fury and disbelief. "It's okay, sweetheart," I whispered, kneeling beside her in the mud. "It's okay." But I could feel her body trembling beneath my touch, the hurt deeper than the cold water that soaked her through. I looked up at Stephanie, who stood at the top of the stairs, her face a twisted mask of indifference. "You pushed her?" I asked, my voice trembling with disbelief. Stephanie rolled her eyes, as though it was no big deal. "She slipped. It's just mud. And the pig comment was just a joke. She knows that," she said dismissively, as if the pain she'd just caused didn't matter at all. Grace's sobs grew louder, and my protective instincts kicked in. "You pushed her," I repeated, the anger swelling inside me. "She's 12 years old, and you pushed her." But it was Michael who truly took charge in that moment. He appeared behind me, his calm demeanor belying the fury in his eyes. His voice, though controlled, was steady and filled with an undeniable power. "What did you just do to my daughter?" he asked Stephanie, his words cutting through the cold air like a knife. Without saying another word, Michael helped Grace to her feet, gently wrapping his own blue dress shirt around her shoulders as if to shield her from the cruelty she'd just endured. "Are you hurt anywhere?" he asked softly, his attention completely on Grace, while the rest of the family stood frozen, unsure of how to react. "No," Grace whispered, her tears still flowing, but she nodded, reassured by Michael's presence. "Good," he said, his voice still soft but firm. He looked at me then, and I could see the decision in his eyes. "We're leaving. Now." It was the calm authority in his tone that silenced any objections from my family. Even Stephanie, who had been so quick to dismiss Grace's suffering, seemed momentarily stunned by Michael's stance. I walked back into the house with Grace, who was still holding on to Michael's shirt tightly. I gathered our coats and Grace's bag, ready to leave behind a family that had repeatedly let us down. Stephanie, of course, had something to say. "You're ruining Thanksgiving over a little mud," she called after us, her voice dripping with disdain. "It's just a joke. You're all overreacting." Michael turned, his face calm, but with a sharp edge to his words. "No, Stephanie. You ruined it when you decided to hurt a child to make yourself feel powerful." The silence that followed was deafening. No one spoke. No one moved. And as Michael led Grace and me out the side gate and toward the car, I couldn't help but feel a strange mixture of relief and guilt. I had finally stood up to my family. I had finally done what I should have done years ago. We drove home in silence. Grace curled up in the back seat, still holding onto Michael's shirt, and I couldn't help but feel a sense of sadness. The Thanksgiving we had once known, the one filled with pretenses and forced smiles, was gone forever. The silence between us was only broken by Grace's soft voice from the back seat. "I'm sorry about your shirt, Michael," she whispered, glancing at the muddy shirt she still clutched around herself. Michael smiled gently in the rearview mirror. "It's just a shirt, sweetie," he said. "You're what matters." It was then that I realized how much we had changed. We had finally found our strength, our voices, and most importantly, our family. The one we had built ourselves, free of judgment and toxic dynamics. As we arrived home, Michael went straight to run a hot bath for Grace, while I helped her out of her mud-soaked clothes. The day's events had shaken us, but they had also helped us break free from the cycle of dysfunction that had kept us in chains for so long. But as the night went on, my phone buzzed with texts from my mother, my father, and even Aunt Catherine. I turned the phone face down, unwilling to face their justifications or apologies yet. It was a strange feeling, not guilt, not anger, but a quiet certainty that I had made the right choice. And then Stephanie's message came through. "Way to ruin Thanksgiving with your drama," she wrote. "Mom's crying because you stormed out over nothing." My hand shook as I read her words, but instead of responding, I blocked her number. I did the same for my parents, their enabling behavior doing just as much harm as Stephanie's cruelty. Grace, standing in the doorway in her robe, looked at me with wide eyes. "Did you really just block Grandma and Grandpa?" "For now," I said quietly. "I think we all need some space to think about what happened today." Michael nodded, understanding completely. "It's about time." As we moved on from the Thanksgiving disaster, things began to shift. Not all at once, but in small ways. Stephanie's attempts to reconnect were met with cautious steps on my part. We would see where it went, but I wouldn't tolerate any more cruelty, not for myself or for Grace. In the months that followed, my family dynamics started to change. Slowly, painfully, but for the better. My mother's letters of apology were followed by real conversations, not just empty words. Stephanie's therapy started to show signs of change, though not without setbacks. But the most important lesson I learned through all of this was that sometimes the most important family traditions are the ones we break. As time went on, things began to settle into a new rhythm for our little family. Michael and I kept to our promise of creating a life free from toxic influences, but there were still challenges ahead. My parents, though not as openly hostile, remained resistant to fully acknowledging the damage they had done over the years. They still wanted to brush things under the rug, but I wasn't willing to let it go that easily. Then, a few weeks later, we received an unexpected letter from my father. I opened it with hesitation, unsure of what to expect. When I read it, I was caught off guard. It wasn't a perfect apology, but it was real, and it was a start. "I've been thinking about Thanksgiving," he wrote, "and about many moments before that. I didn't protect you when you were a child, and I didn't protect Grace either. I don't know if I can change at my age, but I want you to know I see now that I failed you in important ways." I sat there for a moment, stunned. It wasn't the apology I had hoped for, but it was something. Michael and I discussed it at length, and I knew I had to confront my father about everything that had happened. It wasn't just about Thanksgiving. It was about a lifetime of hurt that had been swept aside. When I called him, it was the first honest conversation we had ever had. He cried when I described what it had felt like growing up in a house where I was always the afterthought, always compared to Stephanie. "I never meant to make you feel that way," he said, his voice cracking. "I thought pushing you would make you stronger." I shook my head, my voice firm. "It didn't make me stronger, Dad. It made me doubt my worth. And I'm working to change that now, for me and for Grace." It was a long conversation, full of vulnerability and raw emotion. For the first time in my life, I felt heard. I felt like my pain had been acknowledged, even if it wasn't fully understood. As for Stephanie, her path to change was much slower, but it wasn't without progress. After our coffee shop meeting, she began making more genuine efforts to reconnect. At first, it felt awkward. Her attempts to show interest in my work or Grace's art felt forced, but over time, they became more authentic. She even corrected her daughters when they made dismissive comments about others' appearances, something she would never have done before. It wasn't perfect, but it was something. We decided to take small steps to rebuild what had been broken over the years. A few months after Thanksgiving, we agreed to a small family gathering, just my parents, Stephanie's family, and us. We chose a neutral location, a restaurant with a private dining room. It wasn't without its awkward moments, but the atmosphere was different. No one left in tears. For the first time, I felt like my family might be starting to change. Slowly, but surely. It wasn't perfect. We still had a long way to go, but there was hope. Grace even managed to have a conversation with Emma and Lily that didn't revolve around judgment or comparison. They asked her about her upcoming art show, genuinely interested. For a brief moment, the distance between them seemed to fade. Later that evening, as we drove home, Grace said something that stuck with me. "They're not so bad when they're not being mean," she said thoughtfully, reflecting on her cousin's behavior. Michael glanced at me in the rearview mirror, his eyes warm. "People can change," he said quietly, "especially when they realize what they stand to lose if they don't." As the months passed, we continued to set boundaries and redefine our relationships. Stephanie and I met occasionally for coffee, and though it wasn't always easy, we were learning how to communicate, truly communicate, in a way we never had before. As summer arrived, we received an invitation that would have seemed unthinkable just 6 months earlier. My parents wanted to rent a beach house for a week and have the entire family stay together. At first, I hesitated. I wasn't sure if we were ready to dive back into that environment. But after talking it through with Michael and Grace, we decided to accept, with conditions. We would stay in a nearby hotel, giving us space to retreat if needed, and we would only stay for 3 days instead of the full week. The 3 days at the beach turned out to be a turning point. There were still moments of tension, old patterns trying to resurface, but there were also new connections forming. My father taught Grace how to fish off the pier, listening intently as she shared her dreams of becoming an artist. My mother, though still prone to criticism, made visible efforts to compliment Grace rather than point out flaws. And Stephanie, perhaps the most surprising of all, pulled me aside on our last evening to say, "I'm sorry it took me so long to see how much I was hurting you. Thank you for giving me the chance to do better." As we drove home from the beach, I couldn't help but reflect on the journey we had been on. It had been a difficult road, full of setbacks and hard lessons, but it had also been a road toward healing and growth. The family we had now wasn't perfect, but it was real, and that was enough. On the drive home, Grace spoke up from the back seat. "I'm kind of glad Aunt Stephanie pushed me into that puddle last Thanksgiving." I turned around, surprised. "You are?" She nodded thoughtfully. "If it hadn't happened, everything would still be the same. We'd still be pretending everything was okay when it wasn't. And I might have grown up thinking that's just how families are supposed to be." I looked at Michael, who gave me a knowing smile. The most painful moment in our family's history had turned into the most valuable lesson. That real family isn't about maintaining appearances or enduring mistreatment for the sake of tradition. It's about protecting each other, speaking the truth, even when it's difficult, and being willing to grow and change together. So, if you're watching this and recognizing patterns from your own family, remember, you deserve better than to be someone else's emotional punching bag. Setting boundaries isn't selfish. Sometimes it's the most loving thing you can do, for yourself and for those who need the opportunity to recognize their own harmful behaviors. Have you ever had to stand up to toxic family members? How did you handle it? Let me know in the comments below. And if this story resonated with you, please hit that subscribe button and share this video with someone who might need to hear that they're not alone. Remember, sometimes the most important family traditions are the ones we choose to break. Thank you for watching. You are worthy of respect and genuine love, no matter what anyone else might say. As the months passed, the changes in our family were slow, but they were real. Stephanie, though still struggling, continued to make efforts to change. And while there were setbacks, we kept moving forward. There were times when the old patterns crept back in, but I had finally learned how to set clear boundaries, not just for myself, but for Grace as well. One of the biggest changes came after Grace's art show. For the first time, Stephanie genuinely complimented her work. It wasn't a backhanded comment or an attempt to minimize her accomplishments. It was simply praise, untainted by jealousy or criticism. And for the first time, Grace accepted it with grace, her confidence blooming despite the past. As we moved into the holiday season, we found ourselves in a place of cautious optimism. My parents, though still holding on to some of their old ways, made an effort to respect our boundaries. It wasn't perfect, but it was better. We spent Christmas in a small cabin in the mountains, just the three of us, Michael, Grace, and me. It was quiet, peaceful, and everything we had wanted. We made new traditions that didn't revolve around appearances or perfection. For the first time in years, I felt like we had created the kind of family I had always wanted. And then, out of the blue, I received a text from Patricia, my cousin. It was unexpected, but heartfelt.